Hello. Thanks for coming today. My name is Jim Warren. I'm Executive Director of nonprofit NC Warren. I appreciate those in the room and online. We are here today to recap the legal case to reverse a serious attack on rooftop solar in North Carolina and to summarize the damage that is already being done by Duke Energy's changes, and to talk about how this monopoly attack is the worst possible move in trying to deal with an accelerating climate crisis. And we're here to call on Governor Cooper and other political leaders not to continue allowing destruction of a key North Carolina industry on their watch. Our other speakers today will be Caroline Leary from EWG, Bryce Bruncati from ADEM Solar, Ziad Habash from the Sunrise Movement Durham, and then I'll say a few words before we then move to questions by members of the news media. As I referred earlier, North Carolina's most important industry is in serious danger, and our public officials have allowed it to happen on behalf of a giant corporation. The North Carolina Court of Appeals today heard oral arguments calling for a reversal of the North Carolina Utilities Commission's order on residential solar net metering. Solar installers and suppliers around the country are already being damaged by Duke's rule change that took effect on October 1st. And that includes residential, but also commercial net metering has been changed also. The regulators flatly violated North Carolina law, and they violated open, fair process, in particular on such an extremely important issue. To my right is Caroline Leary. She is COO and General Counsel with EWG, our co-appellant and an excellent ally for many years.
Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. I reiterate everything that Jim says. Why we're here today is to discuss the battle that is going on in the state of North Carolina for the integrity of its energy landscape. And what we've seen is a neglect of statutory requirements, a prioritization of corporate interest over environmental responsibility and consumer empowerment. The main legal issue in this case is whether the Commission did an investigation as to the cost and benefits of net metering net metering. The statute's so clear. That's what it says. It says the Commission must, let me rephrase, it says there must be an investigation of the cost and benefits of customer-sided generation. That just quite simply did not happen here. There was no investigation. There was discussion of costs, but there was not a full discussion of benefits. And at the oral argument today, we were encouraged by the court expressing its concerns about the Commission fulfilling its statutory obligations. The court was really trying to understand how Duke could submit an own investigation about its own costs and benefits. And particularly in this case, what Duke submitted was 7 pages long. That's it to talk about costs and benefits that would be applicable with this new rate. And one of the issues that we talked about in court today in our briefing that has been an issue all along this case is that we never had a right to an evidentiary hearing. We asked for one, we were denied. So we couldn't put testimony up, we couldn't cross-examine people. And that would have allowed actually the Commission to do an investigation if we were afforded some of those due process rights to be able, in order for the Commission to be able to make a full determination of what the cost and what the benefits are. Now, what we're seeing in North Carolina is really is really happening across the country. There is a unified effort to undermine undermine and stifle solar development. This started happening over 10 years ago when the Edison Electric Institute issued a strategic playbook that really hinders the advancement of energy efficiency in rooftop solar. And the reason this is happening is because utilities like Duke know that rooftop solar is their only credible competition. So they want to keep their money, they want to keep their power, they want to keep their monopoly that we have. Additionally, the impacts of solar, anti-solar effects are being seen across the country as well. For example, in California, they recently enacted a really disastrous NIM decision that cut the incentives to rooftop solar. And we're already seeing the impacts of what is happening. The rooftop solar sales have plummeted. 17,000 jobs have been lost. There's a disproportionate effect in vulnerable communities. And the state's ambitious climate goals are going to be really, really hard to reach now. And this is just really serves as a warning to the devastating consequences of not having a robust and incentivizing rooftop solar program, particularly in North Carolina, as the courts and the commission are looking how to figure out the best way and meet its statutory obligations. And the last thing I will say is that EWG is really applauds North Carolina for their mandate to reduce greenhouse gases emissions by 70% by 2030. But we really feel that, as well as with our many partners here in North Carolina, that the net metering goal is required to be able to meet that goal, and that the net solar should be financially accessible for all families to allow greater participation, to reduce greenhouse gases, and to have a climate forward policy that we know North Carolina wants to have. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it back to you.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline. Again, that was Caroline Leary, COO of EWG and General Counsel. Just picking up briefly, as you say, the Commission flatly violated North Carolina law by relying on Duke Energy's internal numbers that weren't even called cost-benefit analysis. And they blocked the independent analysis that was needed. So put into context, many of you have heard it now, the campaign, the national campaign that she talked about has been going on for over 10 years now, and we've heard it over and over again. And Duke Energy and others keep claiming that rooftop solar hurts the poor, solar owners aren't paying their fair share, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically their only argument. It's their key argument for killing competition. But in this case, as Caroline described, Duke Energy fought hard and blocked the very cost-benefit analysis that would show the truth. And the rubber stamp regulators okayed it without even allowing a debate. We have a rigged process in North Carolina, and that's a key part of the problem. So, next, I'll introduce Bryce Bruncotti. I am really pleased to do so. He is Director of Residential Solar for one of the most prominent rooftop companies in the state, 8M Solar, based in Raleigh. Brian? Or Bryce, excuse me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. So as Jim mentioned, I'm Bryce, head of residential sales at 8M Solar. That's the number 8, letter M, Solar. And I'm basically here today to kind of give you some insight into the impact we're already seeing from the loss of net metering and kind of how that outlook looks in 2027 onwards, when everything would be non-net metered. And so I kind of wanted to set the stage that Q4 in the solar industry is typically one of our busiest times. So there's a tax credit, and people sign up, want to get installed as quickly as possible in October, November, December of the year. And so since October 1st, when net metering was no longer an option for solar customers, so this would be last year, we saw on the residential side a 40 to 50% decrease in new people signing up to go solar. So that's a pretty significant drop off in your busiest time of the year. On the commercial side, the impact was even more drastic. I would say 75 to 80% decrease in commercial. People deciding either they wanted to move forward, tabling a project that they were considering. So that's a really drastic drop off, because those are some of those big projects have some of the biggest environmental impact, for example, of any of our kind of systems that we install. So, and this is not only our business. I mean, we are in many trade groups. We meet regularly with other solar installation companies, and we're seeing that across the board. Our distributors, both on the local level, are feeling it already. So local electrical distributors, national equipment suppliers, they see it. They see the trends of California, South Carolina. They're seeing it now in North Carolina. So this is truly across the board, almost an immediate impact, given the lack of net metering. And so one of the big items that, in addition to kind of our business impact, immediate, is accessibility to solar is really impacted by this. So right away, and even as the residential director, I still meet with homeowners on a weekly basis. I try to still stay involved, stay sharp, and I've seen that our clientele has really, really shifted in terms of demographics. So the people who really want to go solar, your high-income households, they've got electric vehicles, they're more technologically savvy. They're still installing solar. That's kind of that business that we have. It's the other people that have really fallen by the wayside. And so it's not just that business impact, it's almost, the exact people that you want to promote going solar, save money on the electric bills, be a part of that green revolution, are not able to do so now because the savings just aren't quite where they need it to be, or the policies are a little too complex. So that's kind of a negative externality that's often overlooked, is that accessibility side of the equation. So that's the environment we're looking at immediately. And so starting in 2027, that's what we're going to be facing across the industry. It's unfortunate, but that is what it is. We'll be seeing a situation similar to California, in South Carolina, where you have these massively contracted solar industries. We employ tens of thousands of people in North Carolina. Our employees are veterans, they're blue collar, we have high tech roles, we have, interns at NC State and from Wake Tech. So it's pretty far reaching what the impacts are going to be once we only have non-net metering as a policy 2027 onwards. I wanted to mention briefly, and it kind of came up in the hearing this morning, that this doesn't necessarily have to be the case, right? So our neighbors to the north, Virginia, they passed a law called the Virginia Clean Economy Act in 2020. It's a bipartisan bill, and most importantly, it's supported by Dominion Energy. And that mandated net metering across the state. And so since that's in place, you have certainty for companies. We've seen many, many solar installation companies pop up. That's creating jobs, tax revenue. We recently expanded into Virginia, and I'm working with rural homeowners, to a crazy degree compared to what we see here in North Carolina. It's great. And even in North Carolina, you have smaller utility companies like, say, the town of Apex. They have their own utility service that actually gets their power from Duke, but they offer net metering because they want to be a pro-solar community. They see the appeal of that. You've got other smaller utilities like South River, EMC, Blue Ridge out in Asheville, who offer net metering. So we have utilities localized in North Carolina offering net metering. We've got other states that have set up the blueprint, and it all just kind of flies in the face of this argument that it's just not possible, or net metering customers don't pay their share of the fixed cost involved. Some of the arguments that you've already heard already. So I just want to mention that briefly. That doesn't have to be the case. And the final thing I want to wrap up with is kind of in the interim, we do have some policies that, potentially offer a path forward if we're not going to have true net metering. We have what's called the bridge rate policy right now, which is kind of a middle ground. It's not quite net metering, but it's not the absolute worst policy in place that will be there in 2027 onwards, like you see in California. So maybe expansion of that, extending that out might be a possibility. We also have a program right now that just was released called the Power Pair Rebate. And so this is a Duke cash incentive to install a solar plus battery system. It's very significant. It really helps with the economics of installing a battery, which is critical when you don't have net metering. So, in the interim, these kind of maybe show a little bit of a path forward, but those are both limited to a limited degree. The Power Pair Rebate is going to end in about August of this year, and then it's done. and the bridge rate only runs through 2027, and they've actually capped how many people can go on that bridge rate. So, they're not the end-all be-all, they're not the pure solution, but perhaps looking at expanding these policies, offering incentives for storage, that's really could be a path forward where maybe even if net metering's not in place, there would still be a robust solar industry, with something like that extended long-term.
That's great. Thing done by Duke Energy and utilities in California, other places, and it's applying to residential and commercial and nonprofit net metering as well. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, this attack is the worst possible move during an accelerating climate crisis, and in particular for the people that are already being harmed so badly by climate change. So just terrible. And one note here is just, NC Warren's position has been solar power on roofs, parking lots, vacant areas is the fastest, cheapest, and it could be the most equitable way for North Carolina to phase out fossil fuels. We have plenty of capacity to do that. Instead, Duke Energy leaders are greatly expanding fossil fuels and gambling on experimental nuclear reactors so they can keep raising rates. That's how the monopoly system works. Next, I'd like to introduce Ziad Habash of Sunrise Durham, another excellent ally and a co-appellant in this case.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jim, Caroline, and Bryce. It's nice to meet you. It's especially nice to hear about what's happening to solar installers firsthand, and that level of detail is really welcome. My name is Ziad Habash. I'm a member of the Sunrise Movement's Durham Hub. We're a youth organization dedicated to fighting the climate crisis and winning a Green New Deal, and we're co-appellants in this lawsuit. I want to start with a brief comment on the expected effects of the climate crisis as a reminder of why we're advocating for renewable energy, even on relatively obscure points like a state-level appeal on net metering. If we stay on our current course, by about 2100, 75% of Himalayan glaciers will disappear, according to the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, a partnership between Himalayan governments. Those glaciers are the main source of water for 2 billion people, and the effects on glaciers are expected to be similar across the Alps, Rockies, Andes, etc. Closer to the home and the present day, North Carolina had its hottest year in 2019, its costliest hurricane in 2018, heaviest rainfall in 2018. That was at least true as of last year. So we should get off of fossil fuels and avert the climate crisis. We live in North Carolina, and so we're responsible for truly cleaning up emissions here. And that means running into Duke Energy's interests, challenging their influence, and greenwashing. Today we're focused on one specific path towards renewables, independent solar and storage, a very attractive option. But our state is on the verge of letting a super rich monopoly smash net metering, the policy framework that makes it possible, and smash a new green industry of which Bryce and other companies are a part, just so they get a little bit more money in already overstuffed pockets. The leaders of this state should not allow that to happen. Before the Utilities Commission ruled on net metering, North Carolina was poised for a boom in independent solar. In 2022, our state installed around 100 megawatts of rooftop solar, a huge increase over 2021. If you go check out the SEIA numbers, the increase in 2022 was huge. I think it almost doubled. We were on the verge of exponential growth. Anyway, and Duke Energy saw that. That's why they decided to try to smash it. Just like utilities have, using the Edison Institute's playbook since 2012, have successfully totally wrecked net metering in Wisconsin, Hawaii, Nevada, plenty of other states. It's part of the background of why many groups, environmental groups, went along with Duke's plan. was to avoid the worst case scenario, not because they thought it was a great idea. It was, you know, an offer they couldn't refuse, I guess. If we win this case in the Court of Appeals, independent solar and storage can continue to hugely reduce people's monthly utility bills. Then we can take it possibly a step further, use it as the basis for pushing public programs to put solar and storage in the hands of millions of North Carolinians. As Bryce described when he was talking about what kind of customers are now able to buy independent solar, what Duke Energy and the NCUC has done is moved it up, put it further out of reach. So we should restore it to, you know, the groups that were able to get it before, but then use public programs and subsidies to push it down into the hands of millions of North Carolinians. And that's a political path, by the way, for galvanizing support for efforts that address the climate crisis. The last point that I'd like to make is about cost shift, or what I guess in court today they were calling cross-subsidization. I want to focus on how Duke Energy and private utilities across the U.S. have pulled off this attack on net metering. Not just in the states that I mentioned, it's in every state, and it's a running fight. Sometimes states fight back, sometimes the independent solar loses. A huge part of it, a crucial part of it, has been this talking point called cost shift, cross-subsidization. It's a hypocritical deception that I think should be exposed. Duke Energy used cost shift as the main justification for changing net metering rules in North Carolina. They went to the NCUC and basically said, I'm putting words in their mouth, the solar owners send excess energy out onto the grid, but they get to use the grid for free. So those costs are passed to non-solar owners, and we've got to fix it. That's their basic framework. Cost shift is an extremely dubious idea, but that misses the point that it's also a very hypocritical one. What's the principle behind Duke Energy's talking point about cost shift? The principle is, if you own energy sources, you pay to use the grid. That's what they're saying. Well, is that principle ever applied to Duke Energy? After all, they own practically all of the energy resources. Duke Energy doesn't pay for grid costs. Ratepayers pay for it and pay for everything else. Ratepayers pay for the power plants, for the executive salaries, for grid maintenance. And then ratepayers pay for the privilege of paying. That's what it means for Duke Energy to have a guaranteed 10% profit. The equivalent would be that if Bryce's customers, their solar panels were paid for by ratepayers and they were guaranteed a profit in the first year of use. I mean, in that case, Duke Energy wouldn't be talking about a cost shift. They'd be screaming at the top of their lungs. But that's the conditions that Duke Energy gets. So that's why the cost shift talking point is hypocrisy. Duke's position is, if solar owners send energy out onto the grid, they have to pay all kinds of fixed costs, take a lower price for the energy they sell. If the utility sends energy out onto the grids, ratepayers pay for that, and just like they pay for everything else. I think that journalists should point out that if there is any cost shift from solar customers to non-solar customers, which again is very doubtful, as everyone here is happy to tell you, then there is certainly a massive cost shift from ratepayers to utilities. Except we just call that a utility bill. And so people shouldn't act like Duke Energy is standing on principle when it brings up cost shift. Their real principle is everything for us, nothing for anyone else, especially pesky solar owners that try to infringe on our monopoly in North Carolina. NC Warren, EWG, and Sunrise Movement, as well as many solar installers, don't accept that. Whether or not the courts throw out the Utilities Commission decision and restore fair net metering, we'll keep pushing political leaders to withstand Duke Energy's influence and expand independent solar and storage so that everyone benefits. This lawsuit is the first step to building a system where if people pay for the electric grid, then they get to own it. Thank you.
Again, Ziad Habash of Sunrise Durham. Make a few comments before we switch to Q&A. Let's talk about cross-subsidization. Solar hurts the poor. People, solar companies not paying their fair share. All similar aspects of a PR campaign. When you back away and look at it, that effort cynically exploits low-income people. And they do that to beat down the very solar that would help them. And these changes Duke has pushed through actually flip the argument. Makes it harder than ever for lower income and middle income people to go solar. I want to be clear, rooftop solar is still a good value even if we don't get the order reversed. It's just that Duke's attack and these changes has basically stifled growth. Nobody's really predicting our market to grow moving forward at this point. The pilot program, as Bryce mentioned, a good step, a limited one, as he said. To me, it's like a Band-Aid on a gaping leg wound. It's far short of saving rooftop solar or our climate, and Duke is using this pilot to mislead people, to fog the issue, and make everybody think, well, these net metering changes are all going to be okay after all. It's heavy-duty greenwash. The key thing is, and you watch and see, short-term, Duke Energy, no matter how successful, Duke Energy will never expand that pilot program. To do so would violate Duke Energy's own long-term business model, which includes and relies on beating down competition. And we cannot let Duke Energy's leaders pretend that all is okay and let this be a prolonged contraction of our solar industry. The situation is urgent. It's urgent for the future of solar and communities already struggling, and for, if we believe the science, for humanity itself. We need to be expanding these changes, or these solutions and these good technologies. No politician wants to see the demise of a key industry on their watch. Conservatives and progressives in North Carolina have shown through conservative polling we want more renewables, we want less monopoly control. And this very case reflects the very worst of the Duke Energy monopoly and what they do to the people of the state they are headquartered in. Governor Roy Cooper has remained silent for over 2 years on this issue, despite dozens of solar companies and thousands of people begging him to take action. Not a word. So whether the court case reverses the order or not, Governor Cooper must lead an effort to change the rigged system in North Carolina, not wait until it's too late for all these fine solar companies and all the people on the front lines of climate change. It's past time for all those who would claim to be leaders in North Carolina to stand up to Duke Energy. Okay, we have time for questions. We've got quite a few reporters online and some here in the room too. Maybe I'll pitch it to these folks that are here smiling and ready to weigh in if they can.
Sure, Will Doran from WRAL. So from, I guess, the point of view of, people who already have rooftop solar or are thinking of getting it and are, looking at this and saying, okay, I want to advocate for changes, what are some of the more realistic policy changes that people can, talk to their elected officials about and ask for, that they want to see happen?
I'm going to pass this to Bryce, but I'll first say that I think the most important and the overarching need is simply demand that our political leaders take action. It's easy to get lost in details, but the right changes can emerge if we have the political will to stand up to this giant corporation, right?
Yeah, good question. So the question is basically, what can we advocate for that would improve things, like make solar a more viable option? There's two options there. There are two pathways. One would be the policies themselves, so net metering, bridge rate, time of use, those are policies. So as I mentioned, so net metering is the best. Time of use is what's going to be the only option in 2027 onwards. The bridge rate is still not bad. So we're talking about not quite as good as net metering, but it's still a very, very good option, or a good option. So if that were, say, in place indefinitely, then that could be a middle ground. Now, I doubt that Duke would want that because it would still lead to people really installing a lot of solar, but that could be something on the sort of what options do you have in terms of policy. On the other side, you have incentives. So if time of use is the only one that's going to be available, and Duke is really going to say that we have to have that for a healthy grid, then you have to incentivize, and by that I mean lower the cost of installing the system. So the current power pair rebate that we mentioned, that's sort of the Band-Aid, it offers a pretty good chunk of change if you install solar and a battery. And so something like that indefinitely could really change the economics in our favor, and maybe it's not quite as good as old net metering, but it's still a really good option for most people. And so something like that, you would need, say, a bill passed. It could be a North Carolina state incentive. So right now you have a federal tax credit. Don't write people a check, just give them a tax credit. Make it maybe higher or step down if it's a lower income, if the household income's under 100K. So there would be ways to structure a policy that really incentivizes it and still makes the economics look good. A battery rebate, a state tax credit, something like that. So it'd have to take, in my opinion, one of those to really move the needle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions from reporters?
Jim, you guys mentioned the cost-benefit analysis. It seems to be really at the crux of all
Speak a
this.
little.
Yeah, on the cost-benefit analysis, what are some of the benefits that y'all would anticipate showing up if it were done in the way that you wanted to see? And that's probably for you or Caroline.
On the cost benefits, you want?
Sure, I can
I've got one
jump
thought,
in.
but I'll let you.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different benefits that that should have been considered. One of it is, there's just cost savings and reduced utility bills, which of course Duke does not think that is a benefit, but if we're looking at society and the state as a whole, like that could be a benefit. In general, there's more resilience and reliability in the energy grid. It promotes just energy independence as a way to prepare for different vulnerabilities that may happen in different energy infrastructures. It really reduces greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, that's a big part of the way that it impacts the carbon footprint. And then one benefit I think that I always think about when I think of the costs and benefits is that it really allows individuals to contribute in a meaningful way to their impact on climate change. So it's a way for people to get involved, to see their actions be used in a positive way, and autonomy of their decisions about how they use energy use. That might be a little on the other side of costs and benefits, but in general, I think I often view it the lens of thinking about maybe not the costs and benefits that the court would consider, the commission is, but in general, when we're talking about the good that solar can do to communities, I think that is right.
Yeah, I was just going to chime briefly from the industry perspective because, when this cost-benefit analysis was done by the Utilities Commission, they took a very, very narrow view of benefits, and that was a big part of the arguments today. And so they really hyper-focused on if we can't really accurately quantify a benefit, then we're not going to take that into account, and I'm paraphrasing, into our analysis. So, us in the industry would argue, what about all the jobs that are being created? What about the economic impact? Or even, do you even put a dollar figure on, say, a climate or environmental externality, whether it's positive or negative? And studies show that negative climate externalities affect low-income communities a lot more than affluent people. So these are sort of benefits that a true cost-benefit analysis would have like factored in, instead of just, okay, like what are the fixed costs we're avoiding, which, you know, Duke of course is narrowly focusing in on that. And they would say, oh, well, if solar is not producing in the morning in the winter and when it's dark out, we're having to ramp up a power plant, right? But if you've got all these homes with rooftop solar on it, for a huge portion of the day, you're never touching those power plants. So what is our net number of power plants that we need, see? And so they really hyper-focus on those negatives or the small benefits, and they ignore huge swaths of positive benefits that a true analysis would factor in.
Yeah, and I would add that there is, I mean, it's not like the commission is just like out of the blue with no guidance about how to determine the cost and benefits. There's national guidelines. Other states have done this. There is a standard in which you can go about this. And then the other point I would add, just escaped me, so. I'm sorry.
Let me pick up briefly then. Great points you both made. Clarifying one thing, the commission did not conduct a cost-benefit analysis. Neither did Duke Energy. Duke had some internal numbers that they said the commission should rely on instead. But one key thing is, of those, well, as came out today, the commission admitted that Duke didn't assess all the benefits. They said, well, we think they assessed most of, or a majority of the benefits. But of those that they did assess, and of the costs they did, we don't buy their numbers on that stuff either. So anyway, it was a rigged process.
Yeah, and I remembered what I was going to say. I'm kind of curious about this not being able to quantify benefits. They say, I mean, they're like, in trial courts we do this all the time in jury hearings. We know how to quantify a person's life value, is what one of the judges asked. So why wouldn't we be able to do similar quantification here?
I just want to pick up on that point specifically.
Yeah.
Are you confident that there is a way to put a dollar figure on the benefits that either you or Bryce laid out?
I mean, you could put a dollar figure on the jobs and the economic impact very easily. I mean, the oil industry does it all the time. I mean, it's pretty common.
Well, and maybe the best proof of this, the question was, can we put a dollar benefit on all these benefits? These studies have been done. One was done in South Carolina fairly recently by a prominent analyst and showed a net benefit for non-solar customers in South Carolina. South Carolina's regulators relied on that study, agreed with it. And so, yet our commission chose not to even allow an independent cost-benefit analysis. It's just, again, it's a rigged system in Duke Energy's favor. It's gotten worse over time. We need to change it. More other questions?
Yeah, there's one from Daniel Walton.
Okay.
Hand raised.
Yeah, Daniel Walton. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Hello, sorry. Yes, I want to go ahead and ask the timeline question. When you're expecting a ruling from the Court of Appeals, and if they say no, what happens next?
Yeah, of course. Happy to answer that. So we're really in the hands of the court now. It could be a few weeks, a few months after that. So we just really don't know. But you know, if we win, which we're hopeful we will, what will likely happen is it will go back to the commission with the court instructing the commission to do specific things or make certain findings, or to maybe even conduct an evidentiary hearing, which we would really like. So that is kind of how that next steps would work.
Okay.
And if they say no, Duke did what the NCUC did what it needed to do, what happens next on your end? Would you appeal to a higher court, or is this the end of the road?
We will evaluate, and certainly appealing to the Supreme Court would be an option that's on the table. But also there is like the commitment, at least from EWG's perspective, in supporting North Carolina's groups who are just on the ground doing the good work, is like we still have Duke's 2024 carbon plan. There's still ways to ensure more energy efficiencies within North Carolina, undoubtedly.
Thanks.
Great. We have one from. I created an echo. We have one from David Borax. David, do you want to chime in?
David Borax, nice to see you.
Yeah, hello, thanks so much. This is just maybe a question for Bryce, but you've mentioned that this is hurting the industry. Can you quantify that in any way? Can we talk about like what happened after October 1st in 23 with loss of business or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I briefly touched on that earlier. So our particular company, you know, on the residential side, we saw about 40 to 50% decrease in the number of people signing on to install a system on the residential side. On the commercial side, it was much more drastic, you know, 70, 80%, either, you know, decrease, or they had been weighing a project and decided to table it. So that's our personal company. Now, like I mentioned, we have industry meetings on a weekly basis, and so we're hearing that across the board. And you know, you hear the installers pushing for a indefinite rebate program, some kind of new incentives, the bridge rate being established permanently. So we do see that firsthand. And then we also hear it, I think, really critically from our distributors, both locally and nationally. And to me, that's really important because you know, you have some of the biggest solar panel manufacturers, inverter manufacturers, battery, like Tesla, for example, is a big name, and they see what's happening in California, and they're like, wow, our numbers are drastically down. We've got a ton of excess inventory, you know, lowers prices in the short term, but you see that wave coming here. And so that's kind of what's staring us in the face. I know that's not I don't have a perfect quantifiable number, but it's pretty, I mean, it seems pretty drastic. Oh, and one thing I'd add on this kind of topic is, in the solar industry, if you're just going to look at numbers, there often is a lag time. So someone would sign up to go. Say someone signed up to install in September before net metering expired, then we're installing those systems, doing the permit, doing the due paperwork in kind of that October, November, December timeframe. So if you just look at the numbers, it's going to see, you could easily say, oh, look, it ended and they're still chumming along, but you won't really see that lag until, say, you know, into this year. It's kind of, there's a delayed registry of what's really going on.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Just one other thing that I'd like to add there is, as folks are writing these articles or making these you know, videos about this topic, make sure you're looking at other states, the range of states,
yes.
Dozens of states where this has happened, and in all kinds of variations. In some states, they totally got rid of net metering. In other cases, they got rid of half of it. In other cases, it had been destroyed and they brought it back. There's tons of case studies where you don't have to take Bryce's word for it that this is going to punch a hole in their industry. Nevada, California, it just goes on. And a major part of the background for this, again, is the Edison Electrical Institute's playbook from 2012, the trade group for all private utilities, or many private utilities, where they simply laid out what they were going to do and why. That is, just any article that doesn't mention that you're not giving the full context and background, in my opinion.
Or, sorry, on that same point, like Virginia, like I keep mentioning, you know, they've done studies on net metering. Dominion found it could still be offered. You know, in Florida, they tried to get rid of net metering, and there's an uproar amongst the industry and citizens, and then DeSantis said, no, we're definitely not going to do that, right? So you know, there are examples of this, you know, not just taking Duke's word for it or our word for it.
Great. We have another question from Michelle Alfini.
Okay. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. Kind of going off of that, what are you using to support your argument that it is net metering that is causing these declines and not any other factors like high interest rates and things like that?
You want me to take that? Yeah, that's a great question for me because I'm literally talking to people on a daily basis. So it's pretty straightforward on the commercial side that some form of net metering is really, really, really important because, you know, and the reason I bring that up is if you're on a time of use rate schedule, which is the alternative to net metering, there's no way for a commercial client to install, say, enough batteries to gain the time of use rates. I mean, I'm kind of using a little bit of lingo, but you can charge the batteries when electricity is cheaper or from solar, and you discharge it during the peak period, so you can kind of game those rates. Commercial clients can't do that, so that's why you see that massive drop-off. On the residential side, the reason net metering is so important is two reasons. One, it's easy to understand and convey to a homeowner, you know, you produce this much electricity, you use this much, here's what your bill is going to be, here's how it works, and this goes directly to that accessibility argument of, you know, if you're not tech savvy or you're not able to kind of understand the value proposition, you're just not going to do it. And I see that firsthand, even just myself talking to people, but my team members see it as well on the residential side. So it's the complexity. And the second thing would be, if you don't have net metering and you have rates really fluctuating throughout the day, you have to have a battery attached to the system, or else your bills, which Duke's own studies found, and they were cited by our attorneys, could increase your bills by up to 118%. That's what their own studies found. And so, you know, if you're someone that works 9 to 5 and you get home and you have to like cook for your family and cut on your oven and your dryer and all that during that peak period, if you don't have a battery, your bills are going to skyrocket if you have solar. And so it becomes, you know, the price point. I've mentioned this to a few different reporters. You know, you're talking, instead of $15,000 to $20,000 for a system, it's $20,000 to $40,000 for a system. So say like, actually more like 30 to 40, you know, for a home that's using $100 a month, if your electric bill is $100 a month. So you can see where, and that's why I really stress, you gotta do some incentives, rebates or something to kind of lower that cost, or else it's, you know, people are just not gonna do it unless you have a Tesla in the garage and, you know, money's not a thing, you just wanna do it. And that's kind of why net metering is so critical. It's simplicity, and then you have to have a battery if you can't net meter.
Good, good.
Another one from Daniel Walton.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can follow up on this idea of kind of environmental justice regarding, you know, the type of people who are able to take advantage of rooftop solar without net metering. Bryce, you had mentioned that you had seen a shift in your clientele. Can you put any quantification on that in terms of either income bands or racial demographics in the people who are signing up for systems now?
Yeah, absolutely. So on that same point, you know, like I think Michelle had mentioned, interest rates do play a factor in this kind of equity conversation. They're very high right now, and so if you're trying to finance a system via a loan, instead of, you know, before I could quote you a 1.99% interest rate, lower monthly payments, now we're at 4.99, 3.99 being kind of the lowest. So that does have that does play into this conversation a little bit, but specifically like our company, we've seen a real shift in demographics. I mean, usually your customer base in solar is household income of 150,000, maybe 100,000 or more, but we still had a subset of probably 25-30% of our customer base being lower than that. And those people have just completely fallen off. You know, they're not getting solar at all because they've had their savings reduced by not having net metering, their savings reduced by 30%, they don't want to risk the higher bills, or they can't afford that battery system, so they've just kind of fallen off entirely. And you see this, basically this shift to sort of, I'm reluctant to put a racial demographic to it because it's kind of is across the board. I mean, we have, it's not necessarily like it's like, oh, just wealthier white homes that we're seeing go solar. I wouldn't say that's the case, but it is a distinct shift in terms of income of the households. I mean, even to qualify for these loans right now, our FICO floor, all of our loan options is 680. So, you know, that's only a certain subset of people that are in that 100K plus household income and 680 or above. Now that being said, on this same note, there's a program that was just passed by the federal government, so Biden's IRA, it's called Solar for All. And so there's $4 billion of funding that's about to be filtered down to the states specifically for the purpose of installing rooftop systems on low and moderate income houses. So imagine when that funding comes through, the reduced impact it's going to have when all the system prices, they're not net metering. So in addition to having to explain to someone the complex rate process and how it's going to work once they have solar, the price points of the systems now just doubled or even tripled for those people. So the impact that those dollars are going to have, even though it's a huge pot of funds, is going to be really, really reduced. And you may just still not be able to make those inroads into these communities that you're looking to, you know, install solar for because of this like lack of net metering or a lack of a bridge rate program or something like that. So that's kind of, yeah, not to get too far into it, but good.
And just one other kind of way to frame this is that what the NCUC decision and Duke Energy's request did is push up the income bracket that can afford this. What any rational society or state would be talking about right now is public subsidies and programs to push down the income level that can think about installing independent solar and storage. And even thinking about new ways where you have community solar programs. We should be pouring public funds into making this a distributed network, really, really working with these solar companies and communities to flood new rooftop solar panels out on every roof. Instead, we're going in the opposite direction. So anyway, just to kind of add another thing.
And I promise this is the last question, but you've repeatedly mentioned the Edison Institute plan as kind of a national coordination on attacking net metering. Curious, over the course of this court battle and your legal research, have you found any evidence of direct coordination between Duke and the Edison Institute in terms of guiding their approach to net metering?
I would simply say probably not, because that's not the way they operate. They are. There was a recent story, a recap of something that came out 7 or 8 years ago, where utilities were paying a former congressional or a state legislator from Florida to go around and try to persuade black community leaders and elected leaders that solar hurts their constituency, and that's been exposed in a number of ways. But utilities don't operate quite that way. And actually the expose of that was showing they were using front companies, so even then it's hard to see the fingerprints. Let's go for it, see if there's one more question, and I've got one quick comment on that last part. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Real briefly, I just want to say to these ways of getting solar, especially to make it more equitable, one thing that NC Warren has been saying, and there are a number of ways this could happen, but this issue of only a narrower group of people being able to afford the upfront cost. We could be, and I think we should be, in North Carolina, sharing the costs and benefits of renewable energy, much the same way we're now forced to share the costs and benefits of dirty power under Duke Energy. Could be done. We've talked to some of the solar companies. There's ways to do this that could benefit the companies and not have all the profit go to the utilities. The commission doesn't want to talk about it, Duke doesn't want to talk about it, but the commission ordered Duke Energy in the previous carbon plan to develop a fair amount of solar power some years down the road. A lot of this could be done in a way, figuring out the best way would take some time, but it is the way we're forced now to pay for dirty power, dangerous power like nuclear. So there's a way to do it. I don't want to open up a new topic there because we're running short on time, but thank you again, everyone, for attending and covering this issue. It's just vitally important that the public hear the truth about these complicated issues. Duke Energy's greenwashing machine is so prodigious, they do an excellent job of misleading people. So thank you very much to the reporters. If you have follow-up questions or need more info, you can contact me or Alex through the information on the press advisory. And thank you again to our panel and everybody for being here today.